On today's episode of Locked On Wild, last year's mega line of Kirill Kaprizov, Eriksson Ek, and Matt Boldy's getting the band together once again.
Hey, this is Matt Boldy, and you're listening to Locked On Wild.
You're Locked On Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is happening, everybody? Welcome in to another episode of Locked On Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, we are your team each and every day. And we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day as well. Make sure to subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. On today's episode of Locked On Wild, we take a look at the new line combinations for the Minnesota Wild as they take on the St. Louis Blues tonight. We'll look at the numbers behind the mega line of Kirill Kaprizov, Matt Boldy, and Eriksson Ek as they are reunited starting tonight. And we'll take a look at the debut of Ben Jones getting into the lineup here this evening as well. My name is Seth Toupal, host of Locked On Wild since 2021, and we're continuing to get everything acclimated here to the new environment, the new apartment, as you can see behind me. And so we are going to bring postcasts back on Thursday. We'll get the Edmonton game. I think it's the Edmonton game first on Thursday night. We'll have a postcast for that, and then we'll, of course, have you covered on Saturday against Calgary as well. But just getting some things further acclimated to the apartment, and want to do that before we dive fully back in. So appreciate everybody's patience, but we'll be back at full bore before you know it. The Minnesota Wild lost over the weekend to the Dallas Stars 2-1, and before that game, there were a couple of key injuries that obviously happened. Matt Zuccarello, Eriksson Ek, and Jonas Brodin. It sounds as though Eriksson Ek and Jonas Brodin are good to go for tonight's game against St. Louis. And after some line combinations that frankly were just a little bit of head scratchers against the Stars, John Hines has pulled all the punches. And he's going with Kirill Kaprizov, Eriksson Ek, and Matt Boldy as his top line combination. Now, that combination was one of the best lines in the NHL after they were united together. They accumulated 29 goals in 49 games as a combination. And if you will recall, that combination did not get put together until after the All-Star break. So you have all of those games after the break, and that combination accounted for 29 goals in 49 games. A goals for per 60 minutes of 4.64. So just doing some heavy lifting as a trio for the Minnesota Wild down the stretch. But the problem was that no other combinations could get anything done other than that top combination. And if opponents were able to shut those three down, then you had a much better chance of being able to shut the Minnesota Wild down by comparison. So it's all going to depend on how the rest of the lineup does with that trio put back together, because if you have one line to shut down, that is a much easier task than trying to shut down an entire team's worth of players. So I like it. I think it is something that we were clamoring for at the beginning of the season, but obviously Matt Zuccarello and Kirill Kaprizov got off to pretty good starts. Obviously now with Matt Zuccarello out for at least 3 to 4 weeks, you don't have to worry about his production not being able to match what it was without Kirill as opposed to with Kirill. So that kind of takes care of itself. Matt Boldy and Kirill, obviously your two best goal scorers at this point in the season. And so why not? Why not give them the opportunity to try to do the heavy lifting for this Minnesota Wild team and see how things go for the rest of the lineup. The rest of the lineup looking like this, by the way. Marcus Johansson on line 2 with Marco Rossi and Ryan Hartman. I don't hate 2/3 of that combination. You've also got Marcus Foligno, Freddie Gaudreau, and Yakov Trenin, and then Jakub Lauko, Marat Huznadinov, and Ben Jones. It sounds like we'll be on the fourth line for the Wild in tonight's game against St. Louis. On defense, similar look to what we've seen, and honestly, there's really no need to change it. Middleton and Faber, very solid. Brodin and Spurgeon, very solid. And John Merrill rotating with Declan Chisholm and Zach Bogosian on that third pairing, at least in practice yesterday. So we'll see as we get closer to game time what the actual D pairings end up being. My guess is that we'll see Merrill and Bogosian, but I've been wrong before on that combination, so I'm not going to, I guess, super speculate, because I could say one thing and it certainly will turn into another. Just looking at a few of the other numbers, or I was trying to at least, but Money Puck is not cooperating. This is I think the key for that trio is going to be to try to get Joel Eriksson Ek going. And his numbers, they're not terrible, but it's just a little bit of a slow start for Eriksson Ek. He has been hurt, obviously, so far this season, but in 14 games, he's got 5 goals and 3 assists. And you look at his pace at this point in the season, he is on pace for 24 goals and 14 assists. So getting Eriksson Ek with Kaprizov and Boldy so that they can do their thing, with Eriksson Ek being able to just camp out in front of the net and be able to really just terrorize the opposing goalie. Hopefully that'll be able to get him going as that solid number 3 option for the Minnesota Wild, at least until Matt Zuccarello is ready to return. Now, that second line, you've got Marco Rossi as the center. You've got Ryan Hartman, who is capable of being a shooting wing. I just continue to not really understand what Marcus Johansson continues to do to warrant time on that second line, because the production, he snapped a string, I think, of something like 13 or 14 games without a point by picking up an assist. And, his numbers too, like, he's on pace for 77 games. He's on pace for 19 points. And so I guess if it were me, which it clearly isn't because I'm here and not in a GM's booth, I would just like to see a flip, because let's look at line 3 for a second. Marcus Foligno has been playing pretty good so far this season. Freddie Gaudreau's production has steadily increased as the season has gone on. And Yakov Trenin has maybe started to kind of figure out how he fits into this Minnesota Wild lineup, because early on in the season for Trenin, there's a little bit of a kind of feel it out and I guess try to find the spot that makes sense, and starting to ramp up the hits a lot. But I think a lot of his success came as part of that fourth line with Lauko and Huznadinov. And so if it's me, I guess I would go with Trenin on the fourth line. I'd put Jones on the third. But then, this is, I think, a perfect point to underscore what still is a very relevant issue for this Minnesota Wild team, is just that they're one top 6 spot short as this roster is constructed. And, with Matt Zuccarello in the lineup, you are still 5 out of 6. And maybe we speculated yesterday with Alex, maybe this is the point where Bill Guerin works a little bit of that hockey magic and tries to make a trade to bring somebody in to fit in that top six, maybe in a higher role now that can slot into a second line role once Zuccarello is able to return. Because it sure would be unfortunate to have a start like this Minnesota Wild team has, to have a start like that go to waste, to where you're not trying to do anything to further what this roster has done so far. And still, this Minnesota Wild team, even after the loss to Dallas, they're still in second place in the Central Division, and they still have some cushion over Dallas. They got a 3-point cushion, and then after that, they have a 5-point cushion on the Colorado Avalanche, who have played 2 more games. So it would be unfortunate to see this strong start just kind of be put on the back burner and not see Bill Guerin try to do something to further it. Over the last couple of years, last year especially, you get off to that really, really bad start and you're digging yourself out from the rest of the season. This year, not the case. This year, a much better start. And so it's still, in my mind, is perfect opportunity to go get something done to try to help this team be more competitive. Beyond the top 3 in probably the Central Division, beyond Winnipeg and Dallas and Vegas, very wide open. Very wide open. So go do something a little funky to add to this mix and to be able to help further what this team has done so far, so that the players get a little jump from that, the excitement that they get from the ownership group saying, all right, we believe in what you're doing and we're going to go try to get somebody to help. Like that helps give a little bit of life to this Minnesota Wild team. So I'm all on board for Guerin making some sort of a hockey trade as he has done. I just hope, as I've said many, many times, I just hope that it doesn't come at the expense of Marco Rossi. And we'll see if that is the case, but hopefully not. We do know that Ben Jones is going to be making his debut for the Minnesota Wild here tonight. And so we'll take a look at what he brings to the table and how he can help the Minnesota Wild as the Wild try to shake off that loss to Dallas and get themselves back in the win column. We'll take a look at all of that, plus give you a preview of tonight's matchup against the St. Louis Blues. That's all on the way here on today's episode of Locked On Wild. We are your team each and every day. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Run your game all season long on Prize Picks. If you're a fan of all of the Minnesota sports teams, you can even double dip to where you are choosing Justin Jefferson to eclipse the 87.5 yards mark in a game. You can go over on that. You can also go over on Kirill Kaprizov, 1.5 goal per game. If you take the overs there and you win, you are in great shape with Prize Picks. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. Run your game. Today's episode of Locked On Wild also brought to you by Game Time. We are getting close to the winter, and that means that you are going to have plenty of opportunities to see your favorite teams in action indoors to beat that brutal Minnesota winter. You can see the Minnesota Timberwolves in action, the Minnesota Wild. You can see the Minnesota Vikings, all at your fingertips. And Game Time wants to make your ticket buying experience as stress-free as possible. Right now, Game Time is having an exclusive zone deal for the NHL Winter Classic event at Wrigley Field. Go to the Game Time app to purchase tickets and get 10% off bleacher seating and 20 to 25% off on home plate area seats. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. Welcome back to today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. As I mentioned, we'll get postcasts back and rolling on Thursday after the Wild take on the Edmonton Oilers. So appreciate everybody's patience here as I get acclimated to the new digs. As you can see behind me, just need a couple more days to just get everything ready to rock. Making sure that the internet is good, all those little things just to make sure that the production value is A-okay. We're going to play around with that a little bit here tonight, but looks as though we are on the right track. So Michael Russo mentioning that Ben Jones is going to make his debut here tonight against the St. Louis Blues. And I'm going to bring this up because you look at the points production for key pieces of that fourth line, which include Jakub Lauko, Marat Huznadinov, and at points, Yakov Trenin. Well, those three have combined this year for 7 points, as Huznadinov has 2 assists in 17 games. Yakov Trenin has 1 assist in 17 games, and Jakub Lauko 2 goals, 2 assists in 17 games. So Ben Jones comes in and he gives you an opportunity to just give that fourth line an opportunity to actually potentially put a goal in the net. He had 4 goals and 8 assists in 14 games with Iowa so far this season. That was after a 21-goal, 43-point campaign for the Calgary Wranglers in 2023-2024. And had 54 points in 71 games for the Wranglers in 2022-2023. He did briefly play with the Vegas Golden Knights back in 2021-2022 and had 2 games with no points and 2 penalty minutes. But he had been, as those stats point out, he'd been off to a pretty good start with the Iowa Wild. And so why not at this point? Because as we've talked about in the past, if you are going to have Liam Ogren on the roster, he should be playing in a top 6 role. He should be playing in a role that's accounted for the skill set that he brings to the table. Fourth line wing is not going to cut that. And I know the Wild are trying to kind of bring Liam Ogren along gradually, because we've also talked, everydayers know, we've talked about the fact that every player has a different timeline as far as how long it takes for them to get acclimated at the NHL level. And so, trying to bring him along a little gradually so he doesn't get overwhelmed. But at the same point, you can do that with a spot in the top 6 as opposed to having to just try to throw him in to a, fourth line spot and say, well, geez, he's not producing. Well, I wonder why. So Ben Jones, I think, is a better fit for a bottom 6 role for this team, but it is a third and fourth line that, for all the things that they do that don't factor into the scoring, need to pick up the production a little bit. You can't be relying exclusively on Kirill Kaprizov and Matt Boldy with a couple of other players. You can't be expecting all of those guys to do all the scoring. So it's it's an opportunity for the fourth line to get a little different look that maybe will lead to some production. And the analytical numbers for Gaudreau, Foligno, and Trennan have been good, but again, let's see some production here. Let's try to get this to more than just a one or a two line team. Let's try to get some goals here. On the power play as well, just to note, Kirill, Eriksson Ek, Matt Boldy, Ryan Hartman, and Declan Chisholm on Unit 1. Marcus Johansson, Marco Rossi, Freddie Gaudreau, Jared Spurgeon, and Brock Faber on line 2 of that power play. So another interesting little wrinkle that John Hines likes to utilize is 2 defensemen on that second power play unit. Doesn't factor in a ton because at the end of the day, you're expecting your top unit to be successful more often than not. But it is an interesting wrinkle to give an opportunity for a guy like Brock Faber maybe to step up in the play and to let a shot fly to try to get this power play up from where it's currently at. It's not bottom half, but it's also very close to the middle. And as the Wilds take on their Central Division opponent, the St. Louis Blues, here tonight, it'd be good to get some special teams scoring to help out against Jordan Binnington in this one. But we'll take a full look at tonight's game as we continue today's episode of Locked On Wild after this. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Final segment of today's episode of Locked On Wild. And once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Reminder tonight, the Minnesota Wild take on the St. Louis Blues. And for the Blues, they continue to just hover right around the median. Not great special teams numbers so far this season. 8, 10, and 1, 5th place in the Central Division, but a key component for the Blues is returning tonight as Robert Thomas makes his return to the lineup after missing 12 games. And in those 12 games, well, St. Louis Blues lost a bunch of them. So it is a welcome addition for the St. Louis Blues, but it makes this game that much more tough for the Minnesota Wild to take down their Central Division rivals. Let's take a look all told at the numbers for this game. The Minnesota Wild currently sitting in 10th in the NHL at 3.35 goals per game. The St. Louis Blues are 4th worst in the NHL at 2.47 goals per game. Now, power play percentage, you say. The Minnesota Wild are 13th with a 20.8% power play. St. Louis Blues 4th worst, 13.6 on the power play. Now, penalty kill. Minnesota Wild actually better than the St. Louis Blues from a penalty kill perspective. It's not a ton, but the Wild are at 77.5% and the Blues are at 76.9. This is a really good example of a team that, is kind of right where the Minnesota Wild were last year. Can't really get out of their own way. Key injuries early in the season. And for the Blues, they're just 1-4 in their last 5 games. And they've lost 4 out of 5, in fact. 5 out of 6, to Utah 4-2, the Washington Capitals, who are just, I don't know how they're doing it, but they lost to the Capitals 8-1. They lost their first game against the Bruins 3-2. Then they lost to the Sabres 4-3 and beat the Bruins 3-2, and then lost to the Hurricanes 4-1 in their most recent game, setting up this matchup against the Minnesota Wild. For St. Louis, some of the statistical leaders, Jordan Kyrou, 16 total points, but just 5 goals in 19 games. He does have 11 assists. And he is tied for the lead in terms of goals on this team with Pavel Buchnevich and Jake Neighbors at 5, because this Blues team has scored just 47 goals in 19 games. Jordan Binnington in net tonight against Philip Gustafsson. Binnington so far 5-7-1 with a 3.2 goals against average and an .886 save percentage. And I always like to look at recent games for goalies that are going up against the Minnesota Wild. And for Binnington, his last start was on the 16th. He beat the Bruins in overtime, giving up just 2 goals on only 18 shots. Before that, a loss to the Buffalo Sabres, in which he gave up 4 goals on 33 shots. Lost to the Bruins, gave up 3 goals on 30 shots. Then got walloped by the Washington Capitals. They left Binnington in for all 8 of those goals on 27 shots. That's going to bring your numbers down considerably, no matter who you are. No matter who you are as a goalie. And tonight, we get another opportunity to see Philip Gustafsson, who continues to lead the pack in several key categories. He is tied with Andre Vasilevsky, Joey Decord, Logan Thompson, and Jacob Markstrom, and Kevin Lankinen, and Aiden Hill with 8 wins on the season. But goals against average, Gustafsson is your leader in terms of goalies who regularly play at 2.08, just ahead of Connor Hellebuck's 2.14. Gustafsson's save percentage is also, again, against for regular goalies. His save percentage is tied with Anthony Stolar's for the lead in the NHL at .927. The key for this Minnesota Wild team is just try to do exactly what they did against the St. Louis Blues the last time these two teams matched up. Get off to a good start, get that first goal so you can get things set up in your favor and can just go to work and attack from there. It will be interesting to see if having Kaprizov, Boldy, and Eriksson Ek back together, if that will help, get this team off to a little better start, because the last few games, it's been scoreless periods or falling behind. And that's not how this Minnesota Wild team is built. They're not built to come from behind. They're built to take a lead and extend it. And so just a better start here, but also like which line other than line 1 is going to step up? Now that we're seeing Kaprizov, Boldy, and Eriksson Ek for the first time, is it going to be line 2, line 3, or line 4? Which one's going to provide the support, provide the help to be able to take some of that scoring expectation off of Kirill and Matt Boldy's shoulders? They can do a lot of it, but they can't do it all. So that's another big key. And I always like to say, just do something that's going to agitate or get in Jordan Binnington's head. Last time, or one of the last times that these two teams squared off, that game where Fleury and Binnington nearly fought, Ryan Hartman walked all the way up to the line but did not cross it. And that led to Binnington coming over to the Minnesota Wild bench and chirping them after he had given up his 5th goal of the game. So just it's all in fun, but it does certainly make a difference for certain goalies throughout the league. And I think Binnington is certainly one of those where it could make the difference for tonight's game. So another good opportunity for the Minnesota Wild. This is a team I think that you probably should beat. I know there are pieces missing in the lineup, but you got your defense at full strength. So defense and Gus should mean that this is a tighter game. You just got to find a way to get one past Binner. That's all you got to do is just find a way to get a couple of goals past Binnington, and you probably come out on top in this game. And then all of a sudden you've got 12 wins and you're keeping pace with Dallas at the top, or with Winnipeg, excuse me, at the top of the division. You're keeping that little cushion between you and Dallas, because we've talked about this a bunch in recent episodes. Thanksgiving is going to be here in just a few days. I think it's 9 days. Yeah, 9 days until Thanksgiving. And if you're in a playoff spot at that point, you're probably going to stay there. If you're not, you're probably not. There are some exceptions, but it's just nice to be in that spot for once, as opposed to trying to claw all the way back from just a dreadfully slow start. So we'll see how things go for tonight's game. We'll have 3 things recap for you tomorrow for what John Hines has to say about this matchup. But thank you, everybody, for tuning in to today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Make sure to subscribe on YouTube if you have not already, so you don't miss out on any new episodes for the rest of the season. Make sure to subscribe, and we'll keep you covered every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.